The strange misfortunes in the village quickly became the main topic of conversation. People were baffled and worried. The once thriving community was now filled with despair. Traders complained about their dwindling sales, farmers found their crops failing, and the rich couldn't understand how their wealth seemed to disappear overnight. Families that once had enough to eat now struggled to put food on the table. Some villagers whispered about curses and evil spirits, while others believed that someone in the village was using dark powers to cause their suffering. The villagers tried to cope with the situation at first, thinking it was just a bad season. They tightened their belts and hoped for better days, but the hardship didn't go away. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The situation only got worse. Some villagers could barely afford a meal, and hunger gnawed at their bellies. The people, desperate for answers, sought traditional spiritual help. They visited the priests and made sacrifices to the gods. But nothing changed. Rituals were performed and offerings were made, yet the village remained under a dark cloud. The frustration among the villagers grew as they watched their lives crumble despite their efforts. In the midst of all this turmoil, Lade's life took a different turn. She continued to use the magical calabash to enrich herself. Whenever she needed something, she would speak into the calabash and it would provide. Whether it was food, money, or clothes, Lade never lacked anything. Her small, worn-out hut soon transformed into a beautiful house filled with fine things. She wore the best clothes, ate the richest food, and lived a life of comfort and luxury. The once poor orphan had become the talk of the village, and everyone wondered how she had suddenly become so wealthy. However, Lade didn't forget the old woman who had once shared her food with her. She often visited the woman, bringing her money and gifts. The old woman, who had always been poor, now lived a comfortable life as well. She was grateful for Lade's kindness and continued to share what she had with others, just as she had done before. As the villagers grew more desperate, they began to notice that while everyone else was suffering, Lade and the old woman seemed untouched by the hardship. It didn't take long for suspicions to arise. People whispered among themselves, wondering how the poor orphan and the old woman had become so wealthy while everyone else struggled. Some villagers even visited Lade and the old woman, begging for food or money. Out of kindness, Lade often shared what she had, and the old woman did the same. But the more they gave, the more questions people had. Parents began sending their children to befriend Lade, hoping to discover the source of her sudden wealth. But Lade was careful. She never let anyone get too close, and she never mentioned the calabash to anyone. No matter how friendly the villagers tried to be, they couldn't uncover her secrets. But suspicion continued to grow. Some villagers, frustrated and confused, began to plot ways to find out the truth about Lade's riches. A group of men decided to trail her, hoping to catch her in the act of whatever they believed she was doing to steal their wealth. They watched her from a distance and even tried to sneak into her home, but they found nothing. Lade, sensing that something was off, became more cautious. She knew the villagers were growing restless, and it made her uncomfortable. As the tension in the village grew, Lade began to fear for her safety. She had heard stories of people being accused of witchcraft and knew that the villagers might soon turn on her. The thought of being labeled a witch or accused of stealing from the villagers haunted her. She knew she couldn't stay in the village much longer. One night, Lade made up her mind to leave. She packed her belongings quietly, taking only what she could carry. The calabash, her most prized possession, was carefully wrapped and hidden among her things. She didn't say goodbye to anyone, not even the old woman. Lade knew that leaving was the only way to protect herself. Under the cover of darkness, she slipped out of her house and made her way to the edge of the village. Her heart pounded in her chest as she hurried through the familiar paths for the last time. She moved quickly, fearing that someone might see her and raise an alarm. The village was quiet with everyone asleep, but Lade didn't stop until she was far away from the village. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she had to find a place where no one knew her or where she could start afresh. Lade walked through the night until she reached a neighboring village. Tired and scared, she found a small, abandoned hut at the edge of the village and decided to make it her new home. She hoped that in this new place, she could live in peace away from the prying eyes and suspicions of her old village. But little did she know, her troubles were far from over. The calabash that had brought her so much wealth was also the source of something far more dangerous. The hardships in the village showed no sign of easing. Each day, the villagers grew more desperate as they struggled to make ends meet. The fields yielded no crops, and the markets were deserted. Families went to bed hungry, and children's cries for food echoed through the night. The once vibrant village was now filled with despair and hopelessness. The village elders, chiefs, and kings convened countless meetings to address the serious situation. They invited spiritualists from far and wide, hoping that they would bring a solution. The spiritualists, after much consultation and ritual, proclaimed that the village was under a curse. They advised performing specific rituals to appease the spirits and remove the curse. Yet, despite their best efforts, offering sacrifices, performing ceremonies, and chanting prayers, nothing changed. The village remained in the grip of misfortune, and the people grew increasingly disillusioned with their leaders' inability to provide relief. One evening, as the old woman sat in front of her mother's home, enjoying the cool evening breeze, a group of young men approached her. They were visibly upset and frustrated. They expressed their concerns about the ongoing suffering and how the elders seemed powerless to help. They told the old woman that the younger generation couldn't continue suffering while the elders appeared indifferent. They even warned her that if no solution was found, they might accuse her of witchcraft. After all, she was the oldest in the village, given that both she and Lade seemed to be the only ones unaffected by the calamities. The old woman was deeply troubled by their words. Although she had always lived a simple and kind life, the growing suspicion around her and Lade made her anxious. She knew that if she didn't do something, the accusations might turn against her. She felt a heavy responsibility to find a solution, not just for her own sake, but for the sake of the entire village. That night, the old woman lay awake, her mind racing with worry. She couldn't sleep, tossing and turning, her thoughts consumed by the villagers' plight. After many restless hours, she eventually drifted off into a troubled sleep. In her dream, she had a vivid and revealing vision. In the dream, a wise and ancient spirit appeared to her, explaining that Lade held the key to resolving the village's suffering. The spirit conveyed that Lade's mysterious calabash was the source of both the village's misfortune and its potential salvation. Upon waking, the old woman felt a sense of urgency. She knew she had to find Lade and get her to help the village. She sent someone to fetch Lade immediately, but as the messenger went to find her, they discovered that Lade had vanished. The search began in earnest. The villagers combed through the entire village, asking anyone if they had seen Lade. They even ventured into nearby villages, but their search was in vain. Lade was nowhere to be found. Rumors soon spread like wildfire. People whispered that Lade was indeed the cause of their misfortune. Many claimed that her sudden wealth was proof of dark magic and that she was a witch. Accusations and fear filled the air as people grew more convinced that Lade had caused their suffering. The villagers' anger and frustration mounted as their search yielded no results. Their hardships continued unabated, and the village remained in turmoil. The old woman, now deeply worried for her own safety, watched helplessly as the village's plight grew worse. The once peaceful village had become a place of suspicion and fear. With Lade gone and no resolution in sight, the village suffering seemed to stretch on indefinitely. Meanwhile, Lade had traveled far to a distant village where she lived comfortably, free from the worries and the hardships she once faced. Her life was filled with abundance thanks to the magical calabash, and she enjoyed every bit of her newfound prosperity. Back in her old village, the situation grew increasingly desperate. After months of failed attempts to resolve their troubles, the villagers invited a renowned seer from afar. Upon hearing their plight, the seer embarked on a spiritual journey, seeking answers in the spirit world. The seer's revelation was startling. The misfortune plaguing the village was a consequence of their past mistreatment of Lade, the orphan they had neglected and ignored. The seer warned that unless they found Lade and made amends, the village would remain in turmoil. The villagers, stunned by this revelation, admitted that they had indeed searched everywhere for Lade without success. Some speculated that she might have met a grim fate in the forest, possibly falling prey to wild animals. The seer, undeterred, performed further rituals to ascertain Lade's fate. It was confirmed that she was still alive. Using his powerful spiritual abilities, the seer invoked a summoning ritual to bring Lade back to the village. As the seer's powerful rituals were conducted, Lade began to experience an inexplicable restlessness. She felt a strong, unshakable urge to return to her former village, and her nights were plagued by a restless sleep. Unable to ignore the feeling any longer, she decided to go back to the village she had left behind. Upon her arrival, the villagers, shocked and relieved, quickly spread the news of her return. They gathered around her, their faces a mix of fear and hope, and ushered her to the palace. The spiritualists greeted her with elaborate praises and ceremonial gestures, making Lade feel both bewildered and uncomfortable. In private, the spiritualist addressed Lade directly. He implored her to forgive the village and restore peace, explaining that only she had the power to resolve the village's misfortune. Lade, you alone hold the key to ending this curse. He said earnestly, we ask for your forgiveness and blessing so that peace may be restored and normalcy returned to the village. Lade, puzzled and defensive, responded, "But I am not the one behind the misfortunes. Why are you treating me like I am responsible for these troubles?" The spiritualist's response was firm yet compassionate. "Whether you are responsible or not, the truth is that you hold the solution. The village suffering began with your neglect, and only your presence can lift the curse. Please, forgive them and help restore balance." Conflicted and uncertain, Lade pondered the spiritualist's words. She knew she had not caused the village suffering, but the overwhelming sense of duty and the villagers' desperation stirred something in her. The thought of returning to her old life and the possibility of making amends weighed heavily on her mind. Confused and uncertain, Lade was about to respond when suddenly she heard the familiar, reassuring voice of a calabash. It spoke softly, guiding her. "Just say a word of prayer, and everything will be restored." Trusting the calabash guidance, Lade closed her eyes and offered a heartfelt prayer for peace and forgiveness. She asked for the village troubles to be lifted and for harmony to return to their lives. A few days later, the effects of her prayer began to unfold. The village experienced a remarkable transformation. Traders found their missing money, and the once thriving markets buzzed with activity again. The rich regained their wealth, and the general chaos gradually dissipated. The villagers, astonished by the swift turn of events, rejoiced as peace was restored. Lade, still processing the miraculous change, felt a sense of relief and fulfillment. Her return to the village was marked by gratitude and newfound respect from the villagers, who now understood the profound impact of their past actions. With peace restored and the village back to its vibrant self, Lade became a revered figure. The villagers, who once treated her with disdain, now looked up to her with deep respect and gratitude. They marveled at how a simple act of prayer had reversed the misfortunes they had faced. Lade continued to live in the village, using her calabash magic wisely. She shared her newfound wealth with those in need and helped rebuild the community, strengthening bonds that had once been frayed. Lade's story became a legend in the village, and so she lived out her days in peace and prosperity, surrounded by friends and a community that had learned the true value of compassion and kindness. The village thrived once more, forever changed from the lessons learned from their past and the grace of their once poor, now esteemed neighbor. Give this video a thumbs up, drop a comment, and also subscribe for more interesting stories. Thanks for always watching. See you in the next one. Goodbye.